get going, can you give us a sense, like, I know we were with you less than a year ago, but could you give us a sense of the big picture out there nationally in parishes and what's happening, since we're now in, again, by the grace of God, the post-pandemic, and things have been changing constantly.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a good news. I think there's some good news, honestly, from what we're seeing. I think there's also obviously continuing to be some challenges and opportunities in the parish landscape. I think from a good news standpoint, we have seen and kind of heard somewhat of a leveling off of kind of returners, in the sense of, I think most parishes would say that they have maybe about 80% back post COVID. So I think that's generally encouraging. I think we have to always remember and put that in perspective that, across the country, we have about 17% of Catholics who are attending Mass on a weekly basis. But I think, before the pandemic, it was probably closer to 20. So we weren't hitting it out of the park before the pandemic. We're certainly not there yet, but I think at least there's been kind of a bounce back to pre-pandemic levels in some respects from what we're seeing and hearing, and kind of a stabilizing, a return to activities and different services and things in most parishes. So I think that's encouraging. I think the other thing that's encouraging to me, and this is more qualitative than anything, is there seems to be a recognition on the parish leader side of a greater sense of urgency than I would have said that I kind of saw or felt from amongst parish leaders. Sometimes we like what we like and we don't necessarily want to change that. I think I'm hearing different questions now. It's more kind of people like gathered on this Zoom saying, okay, what do we need to do? We need to do something differently. So I see that as probably a recognition of kind of coming out of the pandemic and finally it kind of settling in, that things are going to have to be different. I think part of that is also, there's a lot of conversation around this shift from Christendom to apostolic. There was a book that came out from the University of Mary, and that I think has gained a lot of traction. And so I think it's asking people to be challenging their thoughts and thinking differently.
You talk a little bit more about that, Dan?
Yeah, so I think the book, this is not my words, it's a fantastic book. I wonder if I have it here in my office. Very short, and there's a kind of a second one too that I would really encourage people reading. So the first one was called From Christendom to Apostolic Mission, and the second one is called The Religion of the Day. But the first book, people will attribute it to Monsignor James Shea. He's the president of the University of Mary, but it was actually a collection of authors who helped to put it together. And more or less, it's making the case that Christendom, this kind of period of time that we've been used to operating in, is dead. It's gone, and that they define Christendom as kind of the culture is kind of moving in the same direction with us, right? They're kind of promoting religious practice. It's promoting kind of, Christian values. We're just kind of everything's moving in the right direction. And so the church just kind of moves, right? Whereas in apostolic times more closely related to the church, or the earliest church, at the time of the resurrection and Pentecost, that's where the culture is not with you. You're working upstream. And so you have to kind of work harder and have a spirit of heroic witness in a culture that really, this doesn't kind of make sense to people. And I think it's a compelling argument that when we think about the fact that 17% of us are practicing our faith, most of those folks are over 55, according to our research. We now have probably 2 generations of people who aren't rejecting Catholicism or Christianity. They just have never had an experience of it in the first place. Even if they've been baptized as a child, they didn't grow up going to the parish. They don't know what this is, and they don't know why it matters. And a lot of people hear that and say that's sad, and I can understand that. I actually think it's a tremendous opportunity, though, because we're actually not. It's not a lot of baggage that people have of why they've left the church. They've never joined it to begin with, or they've never had this relationship. So we have a real opportunity to kind of represent the church as a community of disciples, and that has a relevant role to play in their lives. But more or less, this book, I think, has really sparked a lot of conversation to say, gosh, if you agree with the premise that we're actually more in a period of time closer to the early church than we were than maybe in the church we remember growing up in. That asks a lot of questions of us relative to what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And I think I find it kind of exciting. I think it could be a little daunting and overwhelming, but I think it's at least raising people's awareness in the parish circles, and I think it's a healthy conversation. Those are some of the good things. I think some of the challenges, or at least maybe transition points, we have to recognize that two really important groups of people are getting older, and so our priests are getting older. Obviously, the average age is about 61 right now in the United States, and so their retirements are. We have this kind of massive retirement cliff that we are approaching. We've known it's coming, but it's getting there. And I live in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. We had 18 men die this year. Now, some of them were retired or senior priests, but probably 5 of them were active pastors. That's a blow to kind of the leadership kind of structure. And we might say, well, there's more opportunities, right? Get some lay people involved, but we also have to remember the second group of people that is getting older are a lot of our lay ecclesial ministers in parishes. So we have to be careful not to assume that there's just this kind of next group of people who are coming up. They're certainly out there, but I think it's we oftentimes focus on the retirement of priests, which is an impressive, an increasing reality. But we also have a large retirement wave coming for lay ministers in parishes, and pastoral staff. So those are 2 really important dynamics that we have to pay attention to. The third one, which is not so much the parish, but I think it will have implications on the parish. We are going to have close to 70 bishop transitions in the next 5 years. Cardinal Sean up there in Boston, I think today's his birthday, or it's right around now, right? So we're any day now. You'll get a new cardinal archbishop in Boston, but 70 dioceses will be, at least 70 dioceses will be changing hands in the next 5 years. That is huge. I mean, just like massive transition that we've never experienced in that wave. Again, it's tied to this kind of priest wave because obviously bishops were priests, but I just think that's a really important dynamic to be prepared for, because again, it creates, I think, a great opportunity for a new chapter in the life of a diocese, which can have, great fruit and implications at the parish level. So those would be some of the things that I see kind of at the landscape level relative to kind of beliefs, practices, which is a lot of our research. I haven't seen all of that kind of continues to remain pretty steady. We still don't feel very comfortable sharing our witness as Catholics. We still can be a little bit more insular at the parish level. We still really value hospitality and welcome, preaching that connects scripture to everyday life. We've seen a little bit of an uptick in belief in the Eucharist, and I think hopefully that's a result of the revival that's going on. And if anybody's going to be at the Congress next month, I hope to see you there. But generally, I think things are holding pretty stable relative to beliefs and practices from what we can tell in the diocese that we're surveying.
Are you confident that the church is ready for all of these changes? I mean, no one expected the pandemic. That talk about a blow, right?
Yeah.
And then 70 bishops. I mean, that is, I didn't realize that. That's a huge transition.
Yeah, the short answer, Karen, is no. I'm not. I don't know that the church is prepared, and I think we're trying to do our best at Catholic Leadership Institute to support that. In fact, one of the things we're doing is actually helping. We have some grant money to actually help a new bishop who comes, like, get his arms around it, like do some visioning, do some planning, work with collaboration with his senior team, build some team, cohesiveness with that senior team. So we're actually watching those transitions and offering with philanthropically funded some support for these dioceses that are going to experience that, because we all can imagine, right, when a new for example, not too far from Boston, the new bishop of Portland, Maine, which is the whole state of Maine, was a priest in Providence, serving the inner city in a really profound way before he was called by Pope Francis to be the bishop of the whole state of Maine. And so he's a wonderful man and he's so talented, but like that's that's a big shift, right? And it's kind of like overnight you receive this responsibility, and who's helping to support and accompany you through that. So that's where we feel just a great privilege to try to support leaders like that. But I don't know that we're prepared for what it will mean. For example, in Philadelphia, for the first time probably in a long time, we have 15 or 16 parishes that are sharing a pastor for the first time. Now, many of you from different parts of the country, you're used to that already, but that's like mind-blowing in Philadelphia, you know? And so not only is the church structure or leadership structure not necessarily as prepared as I might like, I'm not sure that the people in parishes really understand that that's coming and what that means for them relative to their, you know, their typical kind of parish life that they're used to, because it will have some implications. So I do think that's what part of what I'm trying to do. Part of why I like coming to be a part of wonderful things like this is just trying to raise people's awareness so we can be sharing that, so it doesn't hit people, you know, like ice water when it happens, but we can kind of start getting ourselves ready and understanding we have a greater responsibility as laity in our parishes to help in these moments of transition. So.
You know, you had mentioned something just a few minutes ago about being hopeful. It's a new moment, you know, especially for young people. You know, we were finding through our Student Voices project that the Catholic high school students that we were talking to, they really had no recollection of the sexual abuse crisis. And they also have not, again, not to make a gross generalization by any stretch, but many of them have not journeyed weekly with their parents to mass. They're getting a lot of their, I would say, catechesis from being in the Catholic school, and are very curious about the sacraments, and especially embracing the sacrament of confession, which I love, and seeing how they can apply their everyday life and even struggles and wonders to faith and the openness that they share. So I do think it's a whole new moment. And I also am fully convinced after the synod and kind of, you know, talking to high school students and college students, Dan, that a Catholic high school and a Catholic college is almost the new parish for young people. And, you know, we really have to lift up the Catholic schools and help these, you know, Catholic universities, because that's where the young people are. And they are not only our church now, but our church in the future. And I know that you have some qualitative data, not necessarily on the high school students, but beyond, you know.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really excellent point, Karen, that you're making around kind of what, you know, the next generation. I shouldn't even say the next generation. Like, I'm 42 and I'm the first year of the millennial generation. So, but we've been doing qualitative research on the millennial generation. Again, basically starts with me at 42 and goes younger, and then Gen Z. So these are folks in their 20s, you know, early 20s, maybe late teens, and then into their 30s and 40s. So definitely people who are out in the world already, right? In many cases, but a couple different things that we've been doing qualitative research, because we tend to find that in parish life, they're underrepresented relative to the research that we're doing. So we've been really focused on having synodal conversations with these folks in different cities and regions around the country. And it's been fascinating to be a part of them, because we find in these conversations, we have individuals who have 2 feet out of the church. Maybe they grew up baptized but are not practicing. And then we have people who are very much practicing. The interesting thing is they're both saying the same thing, which is the average parish doesn't really work for me. I don't really feel like I have a place in the average parish. Because it generally kind of conforms to schedules and realities for people who are older, because that's who's there and that's who's participating. And so things just kind of take on this shape of that. And so if I'm a young professional, or I'm a young parent, or I'm right out of college, or I'm in college, like if it's not a Newman Center, it doesn't really kind of reach me in any way. And I don't feel like I have a home. Which again can kind of sound sad, but I think when we dig in a little bit deeper and ask them what they're looking for, I don't think their expectations are actually that out of whack. Many of it came down to schedule. So you mentioned, Karen, around confession times, or just going to confession. think about what these folks need, right? They got little kids that are, I know my kids are always, yelling at each other, yelling at me. I'm taking them one place to the other. Like they just want a quiet place to sit, or they just want somebody to talk to. They want some accountability because they don't know what's right or wrong anymore. They are bombarded with information all day long, and they just need some peace. So confession or quiet prayer time or time before the Blessed Sacrament, they're just like, could we do confession some other time than Saturday from 3 to 3:45? Like I live in Philadelphia. In the 10 parishes around me, you can get confession anytime you want, as long as it's Saturday from 3 to 3:45. And it's like, well, why? Look, an evening mass. We've seen parishes that offered an evening daily mass with confession before pull in a whole bunch of younger people because it's just a schedule that works for them. So schedule, Venmo, I mean, they're not crazy things, right? I mean, and so you mentioned kind of Newman centers and supporting them. I really believe that. I almost think, and some people don't agree with me on this, but I almost think we given the mobility of people now, because this generation, millennials, are moving all around all the time for jobs and work and family and all that type of stuff. You almost have to structure the parish as a Newman Center. Like you almost have to assume that people are only going to be there 4 to 6 years. Because I think when you do that, it actually adjusts your mindset to say, I only got them for 4 years. I got to kind of work as hard as I can to help them develop. When you're working at a Newman Center or ministering at a Newman Center, you understand that they will not be here forever. And I think we should do the same with our parishes. They will not be here forever. So what can we do for them in the next 4 to 6 years that will help impact their spiritual life, their faith life, and set them on their course wherever God takes them, right? Whether they stay for 20 years or not, who knows? But I think if we have that mentality that we only have folks in our parishes for 4 to 6 years, and we have to feed their faith as much as possible, I think that would be a great mindset to maybe adopt.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And we were saying to Catholic high schools, like offer confession, at least once a week, just that sacrament alone, it would be helpful.
I went to a Jesuit high school in Philadelphia, St. Joe's Prep, and it was a great experience for me, but I was just with some folks from there earlier this week. They told me about a great thing they're doing on First Fridays, and I forget what they're calling it, but it's like Choose Your Friday or something, where they come into church during their religion period, and they have their choice of 4 different things. They could go to confession, they could do some time before the Blessed Sacrament, they could do a rosary, or they could do something else. It's all devotional type of stuff, but it's just this like constant time. And I think that idea around this generation wanting to choose, I think is a really good thing. Like, I think that shows a sense of ownership. It shows a sense of discernment that I think we want to cultivate, because again, for many of us in Christendom, we kind of grew up and our parents made these choices for us. So the more that we can cultivate a intentional life in faith and intentional choices in how we celebrate our faith from the earliest ages, I think that's another thing we want to try to help instill in our people so that it's much more rooted and grounded for them as they mature.
Well, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot for parishes. It's a lot for pastors. It's a lot for the staff and frankly, the laity. And so a couple of questions there. One is, what do you think they need most? Meaning, what do parishes need most? And then what are some suggestions? You always do a great job with this, and how they can form community and actually, look at that, even if it's 4 to 6 years or whatever the time frame is. Like, how do they really build community? Because that's what's going to bring people back.
Yeah, I think the two questions are related. So I think that the one thing they need the most is probably to let some things go. And that's like the hardest thing in leadership to do. I mean, it's hard for me and the organization we do. It's hard because it's not that the thing, like, I think when things are bad or don't provide value, it's maybe easier to say we shouldn't do that anymore, or we tried that and it doesn't work. And, I think when things do some type of good, or offer some type of good, it's really hard to say we're going to stop doing that to try to pursue a greater good, right? So again, I use daily mass as an example, right? It's the ultimate good when we celebrate the liturgy. It's really hard for parishes to say we're not going to do a daily mass on Wednesday morning because there's a greater good we're trying to achieve on Wednesday evening. It's just, I find it very hard for people to say, we're going to stop doing some things, right? Or, gosh, we have always done this fall festival. We have a group of people who are really committed to it. And it's a part of like our tradition, right? And it might be the best thing you could do, but maybe it's not the best thing you could do. And if you had all that time, what could you do differently? So I think that is really, really hard. The other thing is trying to facilitate space for the next generation. I'll give you an example. We're working with a parish in a rural part of the country, and they really want to make a concerted effort to reach out to young married couples because they're seeing more of them, but they're not doing anything for them. So we got to some strategies around what they wanted to do. They wanted to start small groups that they would host at the parish, and they wanted to start doing it on Thursday night. And I said, okay, great. What's the problem? And they're like, well, we don't have any space, and we only have this one space that we can use, and it's booked. And I said, booked on Thursday night? They said, no, it's booked on Sunday. And I was like, explain. And they said, well, we have a pancake breakfast that, again, some tried and true, long serving members of the community always put on, pancake breakfast on Sunday. And I said, okay, I'm still not seeing the problem. And they said, well, those volunteers need to set up on Wednesday night. And I said, why do they need to set up? Well, they like to do it. It works for their schedule. So this is like this is the 7%. These are the people who are very invested in the parish. They've been doing this pancake breakfast for however many years. And I was like, well, just have them set up on Friday or Saturday. No, they can't do that. They don't want to do that. And I was like, but we can't now use our one space for 4 days because there's a pancake breakfast. Like in little, like, we don't necessarily think of those things, but those are disciplines or practices that either keep people out or welcome people in, right? So we have to kind of be very intentional that we don't let some of the good things we do get in the way of doing some other things that I think are really important. So I think that's one thing. We gotta kind of let things go, and so that we have the energy. The other thing I think we have to do is move away from an event-driven reality to a relationship kind of reality. And so I'm like very much against the hospitality committee. And here's why. Because the hospitality committee sits and talks about hospitality and actually doesn't necessarily do hospitality, or the hospitality is like, we're going to form a line and welcome people as they come into church. But like for an introvert, that's super overwhelming. Like that is not actually helpful. It's too much. What you really want is a group, a network of connectors, people who have been formed or trained to just go to mass or go to parish events or go to the Giant Eagle shopping center and look for people who they might have seen at mass, but they don't know, and to introduce themselves and find out a little bit about their story, and find out about their family and their friends. And because the more that we can be connected as in relationship, this is what we're finding in parishes, the more relationship driven realities we're creating, the stronger the community is. And the more likely it is to kind of grow if we have all of our eyes kind of on the people we don't know, right? And versus kind of trying to create events and hope people will come to those and magically kind of make those connections. We really have to facilitate those connections, so that there's a community that is supporting each other. And then that's when some of the other fruit and events and things can kind of come. So it's not to say events are bad. Events are just not going to do it in and of themselves without the relationship building coming first, I think, or being predominant.
I think that COVID's given us a freedom to make changes, which I think has been really an important time for the church. I'm thinking about the 2,700 priests and pastors that you work with, or that and that you give them advice. And what are some of the key pieces of advice that you give to them? Because it is a really challenging time.
Yeah.
and what does fall on them? And yeah, what would you say, Dan?
Yeah, I think I think one of the things that I try to help them with is to not look around the landscape and internalize failure, personal failure. Because I think that's real for many of our, not only our priests, but I think people serving in ministry. It's like we look around and say like, oh my gosh, 17%, like how can this be? And we almost can't handle it. And so then we can very easily make the connection that we are a failure. And I think that's
Mm,
so one thing I try to remind them is like, first is your identity as, in their case, as priest, a beloved son of the Father. That's who you are. That's not what you do is not who you are. Who you are is a child of God, and he loves you and he's with you, right? So that's number one. If that's your identity, then kind of, what's what in your relationship, like what does that mean for you as a priest? And then what does that inform you to do? And so the other thing, especially as many of them are getting older and they struggle with energy, is again, I'm trying to ask them to think about Father, what is the highest and best use of your time? And in many cases, if we all think about priests who have been influential in our lives, it really has nothing to do with the meetings that they attend. It has to do with their ministry of presence in our lives. So that extra time that they take with a family who's grieving, that time that they were with the family that is sick, showing up to the rehearsal dinner for the married couple, right? Going over to people's houses for meals. Those are the things that actually keep people tethered, not only to them, but actually to the community, given their effects. So now, depending on their personality and their experience and all that type of stuff, some of them are much more likely to want to do that than others, because sometimes the events or the meetings are kind of a way to, we can all get into the habit of checking the box, but I think that's the invitation to them. They're what they can do uniquely, sacramentally, and their ministry of presence is where they have to be focusing their time, and it's actually what means the most to the
yeah.
people. The other things, as important as they are opportunities for the rest of us to really accept our baptismal call to step up and take responsibility for the community. And so that's Karen, this because you've been so kind, but our family has gone through cancer treatment with our son, and I had a priest in Philly who knows my story, and he had a child in his parish who was diagnosed with a brain tumor as well. And so he called me and he's just like, what do I do? Like, and I said, you just go to the hospital and you sit with the parents. Like, you just sit with them. You don't have to have the answers, Father. Like, you don't even necessarily have to say anything. You just sitting with them will mean the most. And it is worth every minute of your time that you're not doing something at the parish office. So I think that relationship, I think that's true for all of us, but especially for our priests, that's the advice that I give them.
Yeah, and I remember you saying, Dan, like your family never would have gotten through what you went through, and without the parish and without the priest.
100%. And I think we all have those stories,
Yes.
but we're not very good about
Sharing.
sharing them or making other people know that that's a reality, and so it's not about boasting about them, but it is about celebrating what community looks like, and that the blessings of it. I mean, I've said this before, my two older girls who are now 16 and 13, their whole there is no better catechesis than the journey that my family went through relative to the importance of the church. And so we all have those, and that's the best formation to say, how were we, as Pope Francis says, how are we in the homes of our brothers and sisters in their darkness, right? Like that's the call. And so that's kind of nice for us on an individual level. What's challenging is to try to, in the best sense, institutionalize the parish to be postured that way, or to be positioned to be responsive that way.
No, well said. Another piece of advice that one of the best pastors I know, Father Jim Laughlin, who is now in Wellesley but was in Wayland, Massachusetts, he always says, delegate. Learn how to delegate, which I think is really hard.
Yeah.
For all of us.
It is. And you know why it's hard? It's hard because we want control. right? And I think it's hard because we want to define it. And I think about this with religious education a lot. It's like we have these debates around what age should confirmation be, and should, you know,
Yeah.
but when we drill down to the heart of that question, it's like, well, what do we have to do to make sure that this kid is prepared for the sacrament, which is a good thought. However, at a certain point, it can creep into like, either we believe the Holy Spirit comes into the life of, you know, our young people through the grace of the sacraments, not by our control, but through the grace of the sacrament, or we don't believe that. Like at a certain point, we have to let go and say, we are called to be, you know, I'm looking at Mother Teresa in your background. We're called not to be successful, we're called to be faithful. Faithful in our belief that God is present in every single person. The Holy Spirit works through every single person, and we just have to do our part to facilitate, you know, those spaces for encounter. But we don't control it. It's not ours to control, and therefore it's not ours to fail or win on. We've already won because he's, you know, died on the cross and rose from the dead for us. So the victory's already won. Everything else we do is just gravy. And so we have to, you know, we have to just do our best and kind of have that spirit of possibility and hope, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Delegate to the Holy Spirit.
Delegate to the Holy Spirit. My Archbishop always says, never doubt the power of the Holy Spirit working in you, through you, and despite you.
I love it. That's